Thank you for having me. I really appreciate being here, and Mark and Patrice for making this happen. A lot of fun for me. I find that these events sort of recharge me, and I feel very liberated that I'm with a friendly audience and we can talk about the big picture and not have to be disciplined just to talk about ROI and boring stuff like money. So a couple things I picked up on, I keyed into on the previous speakers that I just wanted to touch on before I jump into my presentation. When I walked in, John from NEEP was speaking about net energy for schools, or zero energy. I think the full term being zero net energy, implying that certainly the schools need energy, but they're going to on-site generate equivalent or more power than they consume from the grid. And people were asking, well, what's the additional cost and how can we cost justify a zero net energy school? Because certainly that implies distributed generation, meaning that in addition to building the building, we're also developing energy sources as part of that project to be used on site. Now, environmental benefits, obvious that there's less transmission loss. We're generating power from a clean source, whether it's combined heat and power, which I'll touch on, geothermal, or solar. But part of the capital cost of the building is building its own energy plant. So what's the additional cost of that? The real answer, in most cases, is there is no additional cost. In fact, it's less expensive to build, from a first cost perspective, a building that has distributed energy resources if you assume that it's being built for a nonprofit. So focusing in on schools today, most schools are nonprofit, which means they don't have tax equity. So the investment tax credit, which is a 30% federal investment tax credit, which can be enjoyed by a for-profit investor, is not the same, is not enjoyed by a nonprofit. So that investment tax credit for solar is stepping down to 26% this year, and it'll continue to wedding cake over the next few years. But the net of it is that if we assume that the school has a solar system or an energy asset, think investors like assets, the solar system, the geothermal system, the combined heat and power system, that's going to be owned by a third party. So there's no cost to the school to implement the energy assets. So next is, I really enjoy listening to Scott Fairfield, Daphne speak about how they've really created a model in Fairfield to advance clean energy projects. And what their task force has done, I'm formerly a real estate developer, recovering real estate developer, and one of the biggest risks for projects that developers or investors look at is community opposition, land use approvals, the municipal interaction to go from concept to completion. And I think one of the most valuable things that their task force has done is to be the go-between, to advance the projects, to be a point of contact, to educate the communities, the abutting neighbors, as to what it's going to look like, how it's going to behave. That really allows the developer to focus on driving costs down and performing the installation versus worrying that they're going to be caught up in litigation. And that is a real impact to the budget. So that's a very valuable and actionable position for a task force to take. And finally, most recently, I'm happy that I'm following Lance. So he gave us a lot of technical information and allows us to spend more time on an interactive dialogue. But I do want to circle back to things like air quality, the acronym for indoor air quality, IAQ. Frankly, air quality, delivering air quality usually fights energy efficiency. So to be able to deliver proper air quality in this room, we've got to have about 20 CFM per person. So when we all filled the room this morning, those energy recovery ventilators are ramping up and constantly exchanging fresh air, right? And we're exhausting, we're purging the air from this room to accommodate the CO2 from all of us, and we're losing all the heat. So suddenly our electric or heating or thermal demand has been increased as we try to meet the requirements for CO2. So I sort of cringe when people say, and rightly so, I was very interested in LEED certification a few years ago, and one of the projects I'm going to speak of is developing the first LEED certified homes of their size in New England. And the assumption was, oh, it's going to be really cheap to operate. Well, frankly, LEED was very interested in indoor air quality and faced a $50 million class action lawsuit when people said these LEED certified buildings are using more energy and they're not cheaper to operate. So there's sort of a balance in all that. And LEED was, and still is, sort of on advancing a very holistic approach that's looking at life cycle and water and air quality, which are environmental benefits. And certainly asset and comfort benefits, but it's hard to constantly drill down on the cost savings associated with that. I also want to ask everybody to think of a couple questions that we could close with so that we could all share in the dialogue and the answer. And before I forget, we talked a little bit about roof capacities and roof issues stymieing the implementation of solar systems. So I want to talk about, sort of trying to equip you with some dialogue when you're faced with that. We heard something about RECs, or renewable energy credits, and how does that work into this world of PPAs. PPAs are complicated agreements. So it's worth understanding each one of them and the nuances. And I want to talk a little bit about types of solar, and I want to talk about distributed generation. So I'm going to try to click through some slides as really just a prompt for me to think of lessons learned on a few projects. And MHR, I am a clean energy consultant, and I work with contractors. I'm not a contractor, I'm not a bank, but I'm the project manager, if you will, to helping to facilitate and advance projects, not just from planning and conception, managing construction, but getting into the measurement and verification. Do we have proof of concept? Did it really save water? Did it improve the building? Did we fix the leaks? Is the solar system saving the school district energy? And so what are the safeguards that we can put in, both in terms of equipment and in how to document agreements, so that all parties have visibility and we could stand strong and prove out success with these projects? And you've got a great team of people here. Frankly, I'm looking at Dwayne several times. I mean, he, driven by passion and love and technical understanding, has been key to helping deliver many of my projects in the solar space as a contractor. So let's see if I could figure. So I like to take a step back, because people always say, all right, Mark, we're going to get you on the agenda for the Board of Ed. You got 5 minutes. Just keep it high level. And it's like very frustrating because it is complicated. And there are a lot of stakeholders. There are the utilities, there's government, there's code, and there's architects. So there's a lot of parties that we have to coordinate the implementation of our technology, a lot of agendas we have to meet. I like to look at things comprehensively. I don't see solar, for example, as a panacea. So solar has nothing to do with energy efficiency. We could build a building, there's no insulation, there's single pane windows, we can leave the lights on, and just by solarizing it, we've implemented a cleaner source of energy, but the building's no more efficient. So I like to take a step back, and I was speaking with a utility executive this morning who was telling me some of the woes about entering into power purchase agreements. So the power purchase agreement concept, and half of my clients go with the PPA, that is a take or pay agreement on face value. It's like leasing a car. Even if you don't use that car and it sits in your garage, you still have to pay the bank that invested in the car and needs a payback. So these are take or pay agreements, which means that as long as the system's generating power, you are billed for it. Now, the elegance of net metering allows for you to feed back the power in the rare conditions that you don't need that. Your base load you're generating more power than your base load, so there's a rare condition. and is rare in the commercial space, but it is more frequent in the school space because at a high level, schools are somewhat less occupied in the summer. Solar generates the majority of its power in the summer, so there may be times when you are over-generating. It's more likely that a school will be taking advantage of the net metering whereby the power is being credited back, and you're drawing on that credit over the following year. The definition of net metering is at risk legislatively now. We hope that a better plan prevails, but think of net metering as a credit or a store credit. So you bought more milk than you need, you return it to the store, and they say, that's fine, Stop and Shop, you've got a credit slip here it's good for a year. Well, imagine if that credit was only good for a day or an hour. You couldn't really exercise that credit because you've got more milk than you need at that moment. So that hour value credit really is going to disappear. So that would disadvantage net metering. The other thing is the RECs. The program that supports renewable energy credits was a way for the utilities that have the franchise rights to meet their legislatively required clean energy standards. And they do that by procuring or co-investing in renewables, but they were deregulated, so they're not allowed to own the energy asset. So this transaction allows them to co-invest in the solar system using ratepayer dollars to meet their standards. That $1 billion program was a 6-year deployment, which we're now entering year 8 or 9. So complex, all of the money wasn't spoken for, but we are sort of on fumes. So I encourage people that are interested in solar at a municipal level to apply for the renewable energy credits, which will grandfather the net metering, and also set aside, once you post your surety payment, like an annuity, it will set aside money, provided that your solar system is commissioned, and the utility corroborates this with a meter. They will co-invest in that system for a 15-year term. So we spoke a little bit about clean energy, resource conservation. These are some of the areas that I look to because we want to make sure we're not oversizing a solar system. And also, you don't want to look just at what you could generate on the roof, but first try to reduce your total operating expense and load and then right-size your system so you don't end up in a situation where you've agreed to buy more power than your building needs, because that would be a waste. So just another graphic here, how they all come together. So renewables we touched on, that's the distributed energy resource. That's the thing that a third party would invest in, whether it's solar or geothermal or combined heat and power. Water conservation, energy efficiency, and fuel use optimization. Water. So currently there are no incentives to reduce water usage. And a lot of people think, well, that's last on the list, don't bring it up at the board, Mark. There are no incentives for it, and there's really no cost, right? I mean, water, it's an infinite resource. We're looking at multifamily buildings now where the #1 expense to operate the buildings is water. They're paying for water 3 or 4 times. And it's funny, the CFOs often don't add it. Like I look at it and say, well, we're procuring water from the utility, let's say Aquarian, so we've got a volumetric charge. They're heating and cooling the water electrically with gas or oil. They're moving the water around the building, many times constantly circulating that, so you've got instant hot water, and they're moving that water around with electricity. So therein lies the opportunity to install variable speed pumps, for example. So we've got a thermal expense for the water, we've got a procurement expense, and then we're discharging it. And the way discharge is now being metered is changing, so it's becoming volumetric, not just based on square footage of a building. So water really has water is really good. Water conservation is a terrific energy conservation measure for us to develop a payback analysis to help support. And fuel optimization. Like it or not, a lot of buildings use natural gas. I see it as a bridge fuel, cleaner, cheaper, certainly vigorously embrace renewables. But when you've got a gas opportunity, what's happening is the flue gas, the energy that's generated from that thermal cycle, half of it is emitted up the chimney, right? So how can we recapture the heat? So to get to a higher level of efficiency with a gas-fired furnace, we're looking at heat recovery, or more interesting, combined heat and power. So if you think of all these schools that invest in a generator and it's just this emergency asset, there's no payback, there's no ROI. It's like an insurance policy, something you hope you never exercise. But if you can imagine that generator being a gas-fired generator just idling and generating your baseload electric demand and recapturing that heat, that otherwise waste heat, for domestic hot water or space heating. So by implementing cogeneration, combined heat and power, which can be as simple as a four-cylinder engine just idling, using natural gas, a cleaner fuel than oil, and repurposing the waste heat, we've increased the efficiency of that asset 80 or 90%. So few types of projects. Just going to share a couple lessons learned. Clock Tower Close was a multifamily building. It was an old hat factory. It's the largest condominium, adaptive reuse condo that was solarized that I know of in Connecticut. Speak a little bit about Windermere on the Lake, residential community, Town of Wilton, solar master plan, Earth Place Westport, which many of you are familiar with. There's a learning facility there, a museum, and a water quality testing lab. And School Sisters Notre Dame. It's a 38-acre campus with a Montessori school, a retirement center, and a old convent. Clock Tower Close. This factory was originally a hat factory, now is home to about 200 residents. And there is a large electric common load. They have a cooling tower, they've got parking lot lighting, elevators, and so forth. And over this past year, we developed a program which allowed them to implement a large solar system, and it was done in connection with the PPA through the Connecticut Green Bank. What was unique about it is it's the first that I know of whereby we were able to implement a solar system on a condominium. So, and it was more work than we thought. It really became a crusade whereby we had to get a supermajority, more than super, we had to get 80% based on the condominium ownership documents. We had to secure 80% affirmative approval from those 132 different unit owners to use their roof. Because of the length of the agreement being a 20-year power purchase agreement that was financeable, that was considered a permanent modification to the asset. And we started with assuming we're just going to knock on doors and get people to sign up, and we collected all these signatures, brought it back to the board, and they said, that's nice, you've got signatures from renters, but they don't own the units, so they don't have any authority. So we had to track back the deeds and find out who owned all the units. So that was sort of a lesson learned on dealing with condominiums. But I felt very good about it. It won a Stanford 2030 District Award. And what was unique there, again, is that it was adaptive reuse of an existing building that's now on the historic register. And it was determined that this solar upgrade not only was not taxable to unit owners, was doable in the context of a condominium association, but did not impact the historic nature of the building. So when people say you can't do it on condos or you can't do it on landmark buildings, give me a call. We've got a case study here. Yes, you can. Windermere on the Lake, this project's now about 8 years old. It was a redevelopment of a 75-acre parcel that was originally under contract in North Stanford with Toll Brothers, and then they were selling it to a country club which was going to denude the land and build a golf course and tennis clubs and take down all the trees and irrigate it. And we came up with a better plan. It was a conservation development. And the exercise there was land use approvals that would be sympathetic to a habitat management plan. Water conservation was a major interest there. First of all, we looked at identifying native habitat, making sure that we were removing invasive species. We entered the 75-acre site into a long-term habitat management plan. And we tried to help promote native species with the introduction of bluebird nesting boxes, building box cribs, and expanding the bodies of water to repopulate the salamanders and the wood frog and a spotted turtle. And we looked at a way, not just when we started to landscape the properties using drought-tolerant plantings, but rainwater harvesting on all of the homes. The homes were the first to be geothermal, spray foam, LEED certified, and solar. The solar solution there was how could we develop site lighting, how could we light the entrance and the pool house and so forth and the roads without infrastructure costs. So we developed remote panels and these little bollards which had LEDs in them, and they were designed to be dark skies compliant because we didn't want a lawsuit with the neighbors. And we were actually able to develop solar lighting systems, and they've been working now for 12 years, and there was no cost to operate them. So that was an easy way to figure out the billing in a condo association if there is no cost. Wilton Public Schools, we developed an RFP and looked at roofs, and one of the really exciting things here was through competitive, one of the benefits of an RFP was competitive bidding, and the fact that, and I think early on working with Ross Solar, the Energy Commission advanced the balls by securing renewable energy credits, so that when we released the RFP, we had a very clearly defined economics. They had the credits. The credits are like having a coupon. So we've established the framework. We've got the credits. We're just looking for the lowest price installer. And that helped to drive down the cost. And this multi-building solar plan ended up being the least expensive PPA that I know of that's been underwritten by the Green Bank in Connecticut. So the rates were 2 cents fixed for 20 years. So big avoidable cost, depending on the building meter and rate class, somewhere between 18 and 21 cents. We drove that supply and eliminated the corresponding transmission cost down to approximately 2 cents for the buildings that was installed, fixed for 20 years, no escalation. So that was a big win for solar schools. Earth Place, this was a comprehensive deep energy retrofit for a building that had a lot of deferred maintenance, HVAC, air quality, heat destratification, solar, boilers, insulation. Lesson learned here was, we got into it, we said, gee, we've got to meet certain metrics with the Green Bank for payback. So we had 3 sources of other people's money. We had utility credits, and the more we did, the more they would incentivize. So we got to this highest tier of incentives, the comprehensive level. We had a state grant, and we had the Green Bank financing through a PPA the solar system. Problem was, they already had a solar system. So the assumption was, gosh, I wish we met you a few years ago. We signed up a deal before we had power, before we had renewable energy credits, and we're locked into it, and we're done. And we looked into that, and we said, well, actually, you're not done. You've commissioned your solar system. This is regulated through PURA, and it goes beyond DEEP. It's a regional program. And there's more load here, and we were able to play the game again, secure more renewable energy credits, and install another solar system at half the cost of the first system. So now they're working in tandem, and they're feeding into 1 meter. Lesson learned, you can have more than one solar system, more than one PPA tying into the same meter. So just because, gosh, you did it a few years ago, you wish you'd waited, yes, you can still do it again. School Sisters Notre Dame, this is an interesting building. I'd love to meet the architect, 1950s. It was sort of designed like the Pentagon. So if you were a heat sink, it was designed to have the maximum exposure and be the least efficient building. And it was actually built as a school for nuns, and within a few years, the Catholic Church realized actually we're not getting that many enrollees. We need to convert it to a retirement center for nuns. So it changes the energy profile there a little bit. A 38-acre campus in Wilton, Connecticut. There is a healthcare facility there, a school, retirement center, and a collection of homes. So we rolled up all of these buildings, about 250,000 square feet, and did an energy master plan to figure out what we needed to do from an environmental perspective and a cost savings perspective, and came up with a plan to install modulating boilers. We looked at heat destratification fans. This building has very peaked roofs. And the first issue, they said, we want solar, but we can't do solar because we've got slate roofs. Yes, you can. So we installed the first, let's see if I have it here, the first ground-mounted, gosh, I think I'm missing the slide, the first ground-mounted solar system in the town. Installation took about 2 months. Approvals took about 2 years. There was nothing clearly defined in the land use regulations as to how to interpret a solar system. Is it a structure? What is the coverage ratio? What is the setback? What is the front yard? What is the side yard? So there was a big cost and risk the developer took. In this case, they self-developed to figure that out. So if we had had a task force that was aware of the land use issues, that would have sped up the process a little bit. Right, so we installed a roof-mounted system and a ground-mounted solar system on an old septic site. And once I said that, the bank said, oh, okay, we can't do that. We can't install. We don't want to own solar systems on environmental waste. And we said, no, it was an old septic site. It was decommissioned 30 years ago. No, it was in the land use report. There was environmental waste. So be very careful how we define these terms. But anyway, it was a very successful project, and it's overproducing. Nice thing about the ground-mounted systems, I'm going to flip here to types of solar systems. So, yes, the ground-mount systems are more expensive to install, but theoretically, it's a higher yield per foot, because as you could see on the case on the right, there was no space between the panels. You can optimize the angle to the sun where you're not beholden to the existing roof geometry. And next generation is looking at ground-mounted systems that are double or single or double access, which means they track the sun. So you're able to maintain that maximum irradiation throughout the year as the system modulates to face the sun. So certainly far right, ground-mounted systems, more expensive to install, but higher yield potential per square foot of panel space. To the left, going from right to left, ballasted solar systems. So just a little bit of vocabulary here. Ballasted systems suggests that the system is weighted down with trays. Think of it sandbags or purpose-made brick blocks to weigh down the system, as opposed to having to mechanically attach. Mechanically attach, we are penetrating the roof. We're trying to sync up with a structural member to keep the equipment from moving off the roof. But the ballasted system, done with slip sheets in a way that there is no metal or foreign material impacting that roof, can be done so that it conforms to the roof warranty and doesn't compromise that. And that's done through an overburden agreement. So people say, oh, we got a new roof, it's Firestone, it's 3M, it's Corning, can't touch it. Yes, you can touch it, and you can do it in a way that doesn't invalidate the warranty. We have to request the documentation and make sure that the membrane and the slip sheet that's put underneath meets their requirements.
Mark, is that the ballasted a lot more expensive because of the care taken, or is there a percentage? I know every project's different, but is it?
At a high level, the ballasted system is maybe the least expensive. So somebody mentioned, well, we couldn't do solar on a roof because we didn't have the roof weight. Current code requires that you meet at least 30 pounds per square foot for snow load. Solar systems range between 4 and 8 pounds per foot. So when people say, oh, we don't have the roof capacity, well, you got a bigger issue. That means your roof's going to cave in, because code is 30 pounds square foot for snow, 8 to 12 inches of snow, and the solar system can vary. So my question is, how much load do you have? Do you have 5, 6 pounds? We can design the system by distributing the panels so that the average pounds per foot meets whatever whatever capacity you do have. So it's not always a binary yes, no, but there's some way to design around your existing capacity. And the thing is that you can upgrade the roof in the context of PPA. You can use that power purchase agreement to finance roof structural upgrades or roof repairs. So yes, you can. This was recently installed solar system South Elementary School, New Canaan. It's generating, we just finished it, and it's going to generate 80% of the power the school needs right now. They're consuming about 500,000 kilowatt hours a year. They're finishing up a lighting control system and conversion to natural gas. We've built a solar system that's going to generate about 400,000 kilowatt hours a year. And so once we're done with the tune-up, we should be on par, meaning this would be a net zero school. And the cost to the district, even with consulting fees and roof upgrade fees, was zero. So the ROI is infinite. The cost is zero, and it will be a net zero system. And not only is it good for the environment, 2 additional benefits. Since we've got a brand new roof, these solar panels are absorbing the radiation from the sun, will therefore extend the roof life. And I haven't been able to quantify it, maybe Dwayne can help me, but there is a cooling effect. So if you can imagine going to the beach and sitting, one person's under the umbrella and the other person's not, same ambient air temperature, but that umbrella is taking the heat versus your head. So there's a little bit of a cooling effect, which means less wear and tear on the HVAC equipment. And this slide just talks about comprehensive energy plan incentives. Connecticut construction grants can pay for up to 28% of roof cost. Solar PPA is an instrument you can use to finance any of the aspects that generate energy over a long period of time. Renewable energy credits, something we have to apply for. They're metered. Energy opportunities is one of the utilities' names for their comprehensive program. So we talked a little bit about power purchase versus, this is energy efficiency upgrades. We talked a lot about that today. Net metering solar systems, happy to answer questions. And cost benefit of power purchase agreement. Somebody else invests in the equipment, you're going to have to buy what they've invested in, so they need a return, so there is some cost. But if you can bond the equipment, you own it outright, you have a first cost. But in many cases, even without tax equity, the payback's within year 5 or 6, which means that after year 6, your energy is free, and all of the credits go to the town tax-free. So that's something to look at as well. And we talked a little bit about where we're going with solar. So even though we've got a 30% tariff on non-domestic solar panels, the total system cost for implementing solar continues to go down. And I'm not just talking about the panels, the inverters, the hardware, the switchgear, but all in all, even with tariffs, we're seeing cost for installed systems continuing to go down. So they won't need the, even despite the tariffs, they won't need the credits to make it cost justified. That's it. We have time for one or two questions, or? Yep.
One thing I haven't covering the list of, one thing I haven't heard talked about is systems are going in, maybe it doesn't apply to schools, but in many cases, property tax or paying the neighborhood taxes is a part of the cost for a development on the energy system for facing the sort of microgrid in the municipality. You're using town property, the assessor is to get some of it.
So Chuck's question, it basically, if I can paraphrase, has to do with tax assessor and municipality and making the upgrade and taxes. So a couple things. So legislatively in Connecticut, clean energy upgrades, there was a law passed so that you can't be taxed. You expand your master bedroom, you could be taxed on it, but you can't be taxed on implementing solar, a clean energy asset. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that was most recent legislation. The other thing is when schools are buying the assets or municipality, by the way, if I'm the town of Hamden and I want to buy a solar system for the town hall, I have no tax equity, so I don't get a 28% investment tax credit. But I also don't pay tax on the equipment, right? So they're not paying tax on the equipment. The other side of that is that in a power purchase agreement, a private investor owns the equipment, so they're not subject to prevailing wage. So there are a lot of factors to think about. Is there any other questions, or?
Yep, real quick, have you ever seen anybody actually invoke the buyout provision of a PPA? In other words, in year 5, typically you can buy it out.
Right, so Bernie's question, a lot of people just think, just solar, just sign here, let's do it. I want to see the schedule of payments. I want to see the termination schedule, just like a lease agreement. What happens if I want to buy my car out? I want to see that up front. We want to negotiate that up front. That's a very interesting question because, frankly, all these investors, they only care about the system for the first 5 years. And probably an unintended consequence of the current Trump Tax Act allows them to bonus depreciation. So most of the investors that have tax equity, they've written it off within less than 5 years. They're happy to sell it to you at a discounted rate after that. And that's probably the best move for a Board of Ed. In the back?
Yeah, I'm just curious about the opportunity zones.
That's very interesting. So looking for redevelopment opportunities where we can exploit available credits and third-party financing in a tax-free environment, these redevelopment zones, it would be very interesting to look at, for example, solar fields on brownfield sites in a redevelopment zone. Easy to raise money for that. So I'd love to talk about that sometime. Thank you.